they actually used to write to each other. Sorry, just to pick up one thing on that. Mum and Dad used to write to each other because Dad was away so much. And we've inherited just some of these letters, and some of them are really historically precious in that the early days, purchasing the castle and other things like that, which my dad never saw. My mum purchased it. It's a great story of how she went to the auction and bought it. Built it. I exaggerate a little bit. But they used to finish their letters to each other, your loving mule, M-U-L-E, one mule to another. They had that amazing joy of just being so ordinary, but being blessed to be a blessing. And aware of that, they weren't, falsely modest or all of that stuff. But they never lost that humor and that ordinary, that down-to-earthness, which is very appealing in that that just drew us past them to the person who made them who they are, and to be the blessing they became to so many. So I'm working our way a little bit through the life of Peter, and if you've been with us and you've followed and you've been listening, you would know that we started out with his call in Luke 5 and saw something of the progression of that call from just being in a place where we're prepared to listen, we're attracted, there's something real, there's something drawing us to something worth our attention and gathering to hear the word of God in the person of Christ. And then in a personal encounter with into the boat and the fish and going through those steps to the point where he has to leave. He's called to follow me and leave everything. And we're looking at Fisherman to follow her. And then secondarily, we looked at the truth moment. The moment of truth when Peter, we use confession like profession better, professed Christ as who he really was. And if there's ever an era, ever a period in history, in our Western culture particularly, we need truth, it's this time. Because we're surrounded by that which is untruth. Distortions of truth, half-truth, well-meant sometimes. And we're vulnerable to a cultural agenda called positive thinking, which means well. It encourages people to think well of themselves. So I was trained as a school teacher, and we were told to encourage our pupils, our students, to have good self-esteem, so that then they would be free to receive teaching and information and knowledge and concept and all of those things. And if they got bogged down in their own false identity, they couldn't take in other stuff. They're so wrestling with that, which made sense. It's child psychology stuff. And my experience was that actually that's not the case. They don't need self-esteem. They need to discover how to esteem Christ, who is their nature, who is their life. And rather than positive thinking, saying, you guys are great, you're special, you're one of there's no one like you in the world, and kind of cheesy cliches that we were told to indoctrinate them with, I've chosen to instead of using positive thinking, use truth thinking. It's a vastly different thing. And using that in the opportunity I had with young people, they may not have articulated it like this, but they said, actually, we know it's false. We know we're not special. We know we don't deserve to self-esteem. We're not stupid. We're not that naive. But we get this constant mantra, and it can become a kind of brainwashing thing. So we looked at in Matthew 16 at Peter's declaration of truth, which can only come from one source, not from human wisdom, not from human knowledge and comprehension, but from my Father in heaven, as the Lord said to him. And today's the hard one in some ways because we're going to look at his failure, the big failure in his journey to becoming the follower, beyond being a fisherman. And we find it in Luke's Gospel, chapter 22. And you'll be familiar, I think, with what happened here. But let me read two little sections from Luke 22, verses 31 and 32. First, so it's Luke 22, and reading verses 31 and 32. Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift all of you as wheat. But I have prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers. And then in the same chapter, move on to verse 54. Then seizing him, they led him away and took him into the house of the high priest. Peter followed at a distance. And when some there had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and had sat down together, Peter sat down with them. A servant girl saw him seated there in the firelight. She looked closely at him and said, "This man was with him." But he denied it. "Woman, I don't know him. I don't know him," he said. A little later, someone also saw him and said, "You're also one of them." "Man, I am not," Peter replied. About an hour later, another asserted, "Certainly this fellow was with him, for he's a Galilean." Peter replied, "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." But as he was speaking, the cock crowed. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word the Lord had spoken to him, "Before the cock crows today, you will disown me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly. It's a pretty graphic description of Peter's failure, Peter's fall. And I identify with it, maybe not as dramatically, not as publicly as, and this account is given to us with warts and all. But I think the dynamics are the same, certainly in my experience, and I think it's a biblical principle. There's no reason to doubt Peter's zeal, his commitment, his dedication, in fact, even his deep affection for Jesus. He's left everything. His whole economic security, his identity as a boss of a business, his home community in around Bethsaida and around Galilee, that doesn't come without cost. And yet we find him here denying Christ and even cursing that he never knew him. How could that be possible? Well, I think it's possible for us. We may not blurt it out in as straightforward a way as Peter does here, but in attitude or in mentality and in subtle ways, I know I'm vulnerable to that. I've done that, denied Christ. So I want to just pull out, let's say pluck out, that'll fit the two together. These steps, a few of these steps that I think are can be consistent with our experience. Peter had said absolutely, I think emotionally, genuine and sincerely, "I'm ready to go to prison, I'm ready to die before anybody else takes you. And if all else leave you, you can count on me." The first step in when we will fail is when we count on our own strength. You can hear it in the language. I'm willing. I'm ready. I will do this. And Jesus knew full well he couldn't count on Peter's strength. He can't count on our strength. He's not intending to count on our strength. He doesn't despise us and doesn't belittle us and just use us as cannon fodder. He incorporates our whole humanity. But if we count on our own strength, we'll find ourselves in the same boat as Samson, who was supernaturally empowered. The Spirit came upon him. Samson's great for Sunday school because we all love the biceps, the body, and all that image and stuff. I'm not convinced that he looked that impressive. I mean, he may have done that, I'm not claiming I know. But the reason why Samson had such strength was simply because his parents dedicated him to God. And in that time, there was the covenants that were there between Israel, God's people, and God himself. And the purpose of that covenant was that Abrahamic covenant from Genesis 12 is that I will bless you to make you a blessing. And you'll represent me to the nations. Yes, you're the chosen people. Yes, you're the apple of my eye. But I haven't chosen you because you're the greatest and the most attractive and the most impressive. Actually, I've chosen you, it says in the text, because you're the least. But because I've chosen you, and as you walk in this covenant relationship with me, other nations, other cultures are going to go, what is it with those guys? In themselves, they're no different from us. In fact, we don't even like them as much as we like ourselves, because they're not attractive people, even today. As I mentioned, gone to Israel a number of times. There's an attitude sometimes whereby they can be quite cynical and not warm to anybody else. And there's reasons for that. But God had planned to use a nation to reach the nations. And I will bless those who bless you, I will curse those who curse you. And we see that through history, right to today. The target, the center of the world is not New York or London or Beijing or anywhere. In Ezekiel, it says, I've put Jerusalem at the center of the nations. That's why there is so much political conflict. That's the ultimate context where the ultimate battle for the destiny of this world and every human being in it is being fought. And so when Samson was dedicated by his parents to the Lord, probably definitely with that Nazirite vow, he inherited that covenant promise. And so in his body, because there's nobody else who's available in that sense, he becomes a one-man nation. He has the strength of a nation because he's representing the covenant relationship with God. Hasn't changed. God hasn't changed his mind. He hasn't cancelled the covenant. We've despised it, we've ignored it, we've rebelled against it. But he is still faithful. And when he finds a vehicle, a vessel like a young boy, Samson, he invests Samson with the same covenant promise of a nation to impact the world. So that's why I personally don't think Samson's my model for my biceps. Maybe 50 years ago. No, let's not go there. So, but Samson ultimately presumed on his own strength, didn't he? And we won't go into the whole story of Samson. And broke the third of the 3 Nazirite vows to have his hair cut. And it's quite striking in the text there. It says, he didn't know that the strength had gone from him. That's a scary verse. It's one of the scary verses in Scripture. He wasn't conscious of God, and yet he was so powerful, he could smash Philistines by the hundreds, he could pull huge edifices down, but he didn't know that God's strength had gone from him. See, the Holy Spirit is not measurable, but he's strong. Stronger, and I'm going to say this over and over again. Grace is stronger than sin. It's really important we understand that. I always I identify grace with sort of graciousness. It's a lovely abstract concept. Being endearing, being a little bit self-effacing, but warm and nicer than most. No, grace is strength. And that's why Paul says to Timothy, be strong in grace. Grace trumps sin every time. Sin is powerful. Sin is so destructive. But grace is more powerful. We see that on the cross, obviously. That's Satan and sin at its most extreme. And yet, grace breaks through. And victory breaks through over sin, destroys sin. Revelation says the death of death, because death was not part of the created order. It's not natural. It's not part of creation. Death comes in by sin, and grace overcomes it. So while we're very conscious, and we are if we're sensitive to our media, or if we interact with our media and don't batten down the hatches, of the damage that sin is doing in our world, to people individually, to our communities, to our nations, and particularly to our world, all the time, Satan is like that pathetic figure on the sidelines, ugly figure in The Passion of the Christ, Mel Gibson's movie, gloating over his apparent victory, seeing Christ being tortured and smashed and ultimately dead. It's a false assumption and presumption. So God isn't counting on my strength and my capacity to do a job for him, to stand in his stead. Of course, we stand up for Jesus. Great old hymn, stand up for Jesus. Be proud of Jesus, as we've said. But he's not counting on our own strength. And there's many other biblical examples, characters you would know. So the first danger is when Peter thinks, I'm probably the toughest dude around here. My muscles, I've been a fisherman, and John's a bit wimpy, and Judas, he just counts money, so he doesn't even do any exercise. I mean, you can play around with that, but ultimately the most impressive guy, I think, in the group of disciples is Peter. Is Peter. And so it's natural, and he's the natural leader. It's natural for him to say, look, those guys, they're wimps. I'm your man. I'm here for you. I'll do my best for you. I'll do my darndest for you. Counting on his own strength, that is always going to fall short, of course. It's not insincere. And I don't think the Lord Jesus despised it, but he needed to expose it as not what he needs, not what he's counting on, what is dependent upon our strength to do what he's called us to be part of. So that's the first of the slippery slope into big failure. The second was that he was following at a distance. Peter followed at a distance. And in one sense, it's easy to condemn Peter for this because, why wasn't he right there? He claimed to be, but to his credit, he's there, even at a distance. We don't see the others hanging around. They've gone. They've fled, I think. But he's following at a distance. And that's a very it's a very dangerous, it's a very not a good place to be when you're kind of slightly on the edge of Christianity. You're there, but you're not there. You're sort of identified a little bit, as we'll see in a minute, with the crowd, but you're certainly not. You're not where the action is. You're on the fringe. It's comfortable. Like my son Callum, he's so bold now and so ridiculously confident, which I like because confident is confide, with faith, because it's his faith that's not changed his personality, but given him character and his beautiful personality. But when he was younger, he was a shy boy. He used to grow his hair long so he didn't have to make eye contact. I mean, I've been there. I wanted to be a Beatle, so it was cool. But being shy is not an excuse. And when I remember Callum, nearly always when we were down at the beach and he's going through some of the life-saving stuff, and everybody's hanging around the heroes of the lifesavers. They're cool guys and cool gals. And Callum was always on the edge and never put his hand up to volunteer for, I'll swim out to the buoy and come back and prove I can do it. And I'm going, come on, son. Get in there. You know, this is life-saving. This is stuff. You may need to save someone's life. Now he's not, but he's in the business of God using him to bring people to Christ. And he's not on the edge anymore. He's right there. And it's beautiful to see. It's no credit to us. It's totally the transformation, like in Peter's life. But Callum would be the first to say that he follows my personality a little bit. That my first instinct is to step back, not step forward. And if our hesitation to be identified with Christ, and yet we can't deny it because it's too good, it's too true. We'd be lying to ourselves if we didn't have a sense that this is worthy, but I'm just not there yet. That's a very dangerous place to be. It's really critical that that's addressed. That's probably the classic example biblically is David and Bathsheba. David was the warrior. He'd proved it. But he's not in the battlefield. He's at a distance from the action, where God's people are being attacked and where he's standing for that nation that is God's representation in the world. And he's back home. And but it led him to be so vulnerable to the Bathsheba moment. It's so dangerous to follow at a distance. Thirdly, Peter is pointed out as being one of he's in the crowd. If you read it carefully, and I've had this visualized, this courtyard, as I understand it in the Middle Eastern structure, was off the street, and there was an entranceway into the high priest's courtyard. And you had to go through there. But he went in with the crowd. There's another disciple who went in because he was known. Peter's not identified, so he hides in the crowd. And it's easy to hide in the crowd. And I learned a lesson at high school. Well, hopefully I learned a few, but this life lesson, you're not safe in a crowd. You know, sometimes we think, we hide in the crowd, nobody will pick us out. And the situation, this is just a schoolboy story, but we were hanging out after school, a group of us, and we were young. I was 12, 13, I was probably 13, 14. And the senior boys, it's a boys' school, and the senior guys were training for rugby, and they were our heroes. They were like men. They were 16, 17, but they had hair in places that I didn't know, I didn't have. So they were like, wow. And we try to favor them because they were the dudes, as I think you would say. We didn't know what that word was. And so there's a group of us, and we were watching Mr. Parker, who was our sports teacher, training the first 15, the cream of the guys who were playing rugby. And he sent them on a run around up through a hill and back down through the bush and back into the playing area. And we saw what was happening, and we were watching it from a distance. And he sent them off. And we'd done that run a number of times because he'd sent us off. And there was a little trick we used to do, because there was a big stone wall that went around sort of a third of it, let's say, a portion of it. And some of us would run hard, then hide behind the wall, and then spit on our hands, put a bit of moisture, and come back as though we'd actually done the whole course, but we hadn't. We just waited there till the keen guys came back, and then we joined in. And get away with it. We didn't have to, we weren't puffed out. We were just cool. We thought we were smart. And so when we saw Mr. Parker send the first guys off, the first 15 off, and they ran off, because we were that kind of failure, we thought maybe there's some hiding there, because Mr. Parker decided he would go along the wall and sneakily looked to see if anybody had done what we used to do, and was a bit of a trend. And so we thought, look, Parker's going to get the guys in trouble. Let's shout out Sneaky Parker, so that the guys will hear, and then they'll be okay, and they'll think we're cool. Pretty naive. So we agreed, yeah, okay, we'll do 1, 2, 3, we'll shout it out, and the whole, everybody, no worries, we're all, it's a long way away, there's a group of us, it'll be fine. So sure enough, and I'm, yes, I'm in this. So 1, 2, 3, and I belted out as loud as I could, Sneaky Parker. And I'll turn around, I'm the only one standing there. They all went and hid behind the hedge. And so Mr. Parker turned round. Thomas, to the gym. We're talking old school stuff. Take your pants down. Took his runners off. I got my first tattoo. It said, made in China, backwards. It's a life lesson. Never trust the crowd, especially those guys. We might trust in our strength. We might hide in the crowd, follow at a distance. And then it was interesting just going through this last night. It then becomes the challenge, the question of association, and particularly personal identity. And I was so surprised that I can't understand how Peter could suddenly, having been up there in the Garden of Gethsemane and bravely standing against Roman soldiers and taking his sword out as a fisherman, he wasn't really good, took the guy's ear off, you know the story, prepared to risk his life as he promised in that situation. And here he is now in this crowd, and he's pointed out as being associated with Jesus. They say, this man was with him. You're one of his group. You're one of his crowd. Twice he's accused of association. And then he's even more pertinently, one person says, you are also one of them. That's even more. You're not just a hanger-on. You're not just kind of one of the followers. You're actually one of the core. You're identified with this person who is being arrested and who's being exposed and being put on trial and being tormented. And I always used to struggle a little bit with that with Peter, because the impression of Peter is he's somebody who's got the opposite perspective, that it wouldn't bother him, but it bothered him and it penetrated him, and he comes to the incredible point where he denies Christ in his presence. And I thought about that, and I thought, it doesn't fit. And then I realized, actually, we're doing the same today. And this is really, and I said to Charlie just before, this is for you students. So anybody over 35, you don't have to listen to this. But for you students, I think this is our world now. It's in a lesser way, it's my world, but it's more your world and going that way. And nothing new in this, nothing you don't know already, but we're facing a culture that is pointing the finger that we are associated with Christ. It's Christianity, we know. And they hate Christianity. They don't mind Christ, but they hate Christianity. And the subtlety and the nuances and the cancel culture and the critical race theory, all of the cultural dynamics that are happening now, that's what Peter is really facing. You're one of them. You were with him. And it's not cool. It's not acceptable. And especially if you dare to identify with him. And you guys who are students, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but that's the world, and we're very aware of it, and obviously the older generation, we are too, and particularly even within the Torchbearer world, we're conscious, and we're in Australia and New Zealand, where I live, our government is becoming increasingly oppressive, increasingly invasive as to the freedom we have to run Bible school with the principles and with the uniqueness of the message and the uniqueness of who Christ is. And so, and it's at every level, from the academic to the culture, and social media, and particularly the media, into the government level. And I just had to email overnight because the government's requiring all the board members, the board directors in our case, at Cape Mary Australia, to submit a unique ID. And so I've done it. It's easy to do because I'm already registered with the government. We've got 2 of our board members that don't live in Australia, and they've had to resign overnight because they're going to fine us. If we haven't got IDs registered with our government by the end of this month, we're fined $13,000. It's nonsense. It's not for security. It's not to protect charities. We know what's behind it. And I'm not. This is not conspiracy theory stuff. This is truth. This is not. And I wasn't sure whether to do this, but let me, if we can put the PowerPoint on. I want to. This is a little bit in-house. It's Australia, but there is a guy in Australia at the moment. His name is Andrew Thorburn, and this is him, and he's a Christian, but he's a businessman, very successful. In fact, he was appointed about 5 or 6 years ago as the head of one of our 4 national banks, and the NAB Bank, the National Australia Bank. And it's a major bank, so it's like right in the middle of our culture, prestigious. And in his role as CEO, he initiated some really good, appropriate policies and protocols to affirm inclusivity, diversity in the workforce, not pandering to tokenism and all of that stuff, but really making genuinely the case that anybody of any gender, of any race, color, creed, would not be prejudiced against. And he's recognized for that. He was affirmed for that. But about just a few weeks ago, he was appointed, he stepped down from that, stepped away, and got appointed as the CEO of Essendon Australian Football League Club. You're supposed to be impressed by that. That's our biggest sport. That's one of our national sports, along with cricket. And the AFL, that's like, you're the coolest guy. If you're the head of Essendon Bombers, that's like, man, I don't know, there must be many equivalents, or equal equivalents in Australia, in the US.
Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah, but who's the coach? Who's the coach? Anybody know? Oh, see, you don't have one. But this guy, Andrew, so here he is, and within a day of being appointed, he's pressured to resign. It's a football club. What's he resigning for? He's incredibly capable, got great history, prestige. You see why they appointed him. It's because he's a Christian. And the church he goes to, that he's actually on the, in fairness, he's on the board of, 10 years ago, it's 10, it's maybe 8, it's maybe 12, it's years ago, they found a sermon that condemned homosexuality as a sin. He wasn't even there. He didn't preach the sermon. He didn't hear the sermon. He didn't reproduce the sermon, put it on his Facebook page or anything like that. He just happened to be associated with a church that these many years ago condemned homosexuality as a sin. And he's pressured to resign. He's resigned. It's in our national news. And There's a lot of people upset, but there's a lot of people going, yeah, he should resign. And the justification is that his values are no longer appropriate for our sporting code. We've got Muslims, we've got multiracial people, particularly Pacific Islanders who are involved in that sport, of all kinds, who are strongly Christian, and Muslims who are strongly Muslim, but he's a useful target, and it's hit the fan. When Peter's accused of being associated with Jesus, I used to think, man, you a minute ago you were so brave, and now you're so pathetic. It's hard, it's subtle, it's complex, and this coming generation, you don't need me to tell you this, are going to face that. And this is probably relatively mild compared to what is coming down the track. And I'm not trying to be conspiracy theorist or doom-saying. Because as Johann Schepp, one of the Torchbearer guys, often used to say, the worse it gets for the world and for us, the better it is for the gospel. Because not everybody is buying into this. Nearly said a wrong word then. Is crap a bad word? That's what I was going to say. I'm not sure if you're allowed to say that here or not. So Peter denied his identity. He denied his association with Jesus, and then he denied his identity. You're one of them. You're really one of them. We're such an enemy, aren't we, as Christians? Gosh. It's such a bizarre twisting of history, for one thing. It's twisting of the truth. In the name of good things. Tolerance. In the name of all that stuff. Anyway, that's enough. It's not even political, but enough cultural critiquing. And then, as he denied him, the rooster crowed. And he was speaking with curses. Wow. Hard to believe. But you know who was least surprised? I think Peter was surprised that he went to those depths of denial. But the one who was least surprised, of course, was Jesus. And I love it, the fact that at this moment, Peter, it says, as he was speaking, the cock crowed. The Lord, this is verse 61, the Lord turned. And what did he do? He looked straight at Peter. The Lord turned. There's a crowd that he's being smashed, he's being abused, he's being just beaten to death, literally, ultimately. He turns to Peter and looks at Peter. Not with surprise, not with, how could you let me down? You know what that look was? That look was, I love you, man. Totally love you. I think you're embarrassed. I think you're ashamed. It says he went away, wept bitterly. That look didn't turn him away. That look invited him closer to his person. I said I was trained as a school teacher, and one of my first temporary appointments, you go through a probationary period to be fully qualified. And I went to be interviewed by a principal of the school down in a place maybe an hour or two from Capernwray, and in England. And the principal interviewed me and said, so Mr. Thomas, you want to be a probationary teacher? I've got a few questions, some normal stuff. And then he said, so what's the most important quality a teacher has? So I said, oh, I know this. You have to really know your subject, because I was teaching seniors, so you have to really know your material, know your subject. He said, oh, that's very good. That's not your most important quality, though. Okay. I'm trying to think through 4 years of teacher training, and I can't even answer that second question. And so I came up with, well, knowing the material, you've got to know your students. And you've got to know, and he said, that's good. And then he said, but that's not your most important quality. And then I went, okay, third strike and I'm going to be out. But third one is, okay, you know your material, you know your students. You have to have the skills of communication and meet them where they're at and be creative. And, I try to be all clever, use stuff. He said, that's good, Mr. Thomas, but it's not your most important attribute as a teacher. So, okay, I don't get the job. He said, no, you'll get the job, but your most important attribute as a teacher are your eyes. My eyes? He said, yes. You will teach with your eyes. And he's not a Christian, and I didn't think of it in Christian terms at the time. I just thought, well, that's a bit deep for a bloke. He's just an ordinary fella. But he said, because it's about relationship, something like that. It was fairly soft sort of conclusion, but he was right. He was a mature, he'd been teaching obviously years and years. And he mentioned you'll teach with your eyes because it's about relationship. And I discovered that when I was teaching, when I got my first real appointment in North Wales at this school. And when you get your first appointment, as a new teacher, they know you're a new teacher, so you're kind of really on your guard. So I came in there like Darth Vader, if you know who he is. Heavy breathing. My first day, and I had the list of the kids there, the students, and I just randomly picked out a name, Macintosh. Macintosh, stand up. And the guy's looking at me, and Macintosh stands up. And I looked at him. So you're Macintosh. Sit down. Oh, that went well. Okay, I'll pick another one. Bainbridge. Bainbridge, stand up. You're Bainbridge. Sit down. Okay. Turn to chapter 1 in your textbook. Macintosh, Bainbridge, and all of you. And so who's this guy? And this is true, and believe me. So I got going pretty well. They think I'm the man. And I think it was in that first week, first few days, and they were very nervous with me. The guy put his hand up, said, "Sir, Mr. Thomas." Yes? How dare you interrupt my class? He said, "I think the school is on fire." I go, "Sit down and shut up. Do you think I'm going to fall for that, old one?" And I thought, I better just check. So I walked through the classroom down, just casually, looking like, and I looked out the window. The school was on fire. The main auditorium was burning. This was a 16th century, actually earlier than that, some of it was 12th century. It's really ancient, classic school, and it's on fire. I said, "The school's on fire." Calmly, "Follow me." And they all filed out before me. I picked up a couple of fire extinguishers and started fighting the fire. It made them stand in line in the parking lot. They actually called me $6 million man after that. There was an old TV show for under 50-year-olds. And they used to, as I walk around the classroom, they'd sing the tune, and $6 million man. Anyway. But the point is that I taught with my eyes. I didn't teach well, but you communicate with your eyes. And Jesus turned and looked, but it wasn't a look as I was looking at Macintosh and Bainbridge or whoever it was. It was the opposite. It was a look of total affirmation. And I say that because this is the Father's look. And I love this. I have this print in my office. I don't know who the artist is, but this is the prodigal's father. And it tells us he went out day after day looking to the horizon for his son to return. That's the look of Jesus. That's what Peter saw. And it hurt him so much. He turned away and left. And we won't go further than this, but in Psalm 32, it talks about, David's talking about really repentance. And because that's the first look is the Father's look, and welcomes us, runs, as you know, runs to him and embraces him, and receives him as he is, not cleaned up, not sorted out, not repenting he's repented in his heart before that, but just professing his total unworthiness, and that would his Father take him even as a servant, he would be privileged to, he was unworthy to be even that, but would he take him as a servant? And in Psalm 32, I love the way it's put here, and just picking up verse 3, when I kept silent, my bones waste away, through my groaning all day long, for day and night your hand was heavy on me. My strength was sapped as in the heat of summer. Then I acknowledged my sin to you and did not cover up my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the guilt of my sin. That's confession of sin. Therefore, let all the faithful pray to you while you may be found. Surely the rising of the mighty waters will not reach them. You are my hiding place. You will protect me from trouble and surround me with songs of deliverance. And then here's the key thought. Verse 8. I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I will counsel you with my loving eye on you. See, we come as wretched as David's putting it here, acknowledging, not covering up our iniquity, not hiding in the crowd, not kowtowing to the culture and its demands that we conform and we don't be bigoted and we don't be dogmatic and we don't be fundamentalist and all of the language, the baggage, the descriptions they like to give to us, which we should take as badge of honor in a sense. Not that we think we're heroic. But I will instruct you. We come to him with nothing. He looks at us with everything of his love and compassion and capacity to take what we are consciously unworthy of, a sin, and bear our sin and remove it. Its power, its sting is gone. Jesus turned and looked. He was a broken man now, but is actually a key step on his journey from being a fisherman to a follower. I want us to finish, and it's so interesting because this thought just came to me overnight. And I was hesitant because it's old school in a sense, but turn your eyes upon Jesus, look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. You know, our eyes naturally are around us and our friends and our culture and our world and its goods and its bads. consciously and intentionally, somehow Peter was in such a place in the middle of denying his Lord and Savior, who he had claimed to be willing to die for, looks at him. And what does he get? A look of love. It breaks him. He weeps bitterly. But it's the key start of a restored relationship, which we'll look at next time. But I asked the guys to lead us just in finally, as we finish, just the chorus. So if you stay seated, but thanks, Tony.